Civilizations last about 250 years. We're coming to the end of that. And the big question is, how are we going to respond? Are we going to let the chips fall where they may? Or will we build something even better? Welcome to the New Canada Conversation. Just so you know, that 250-year time limit was the conclusion of John Bagot Glubb, a British Army officer stationed in the Middle East through the mid-20th century. His conclusions can be found in his book, The Fate of Empires, first published in 1978. He has not been alone in suggesting this expiry date. Civilizations and empires all come to an end eventually. America is now 250 years old. Canada, if we think about her as being formed not in 1867 with Confederation, but when Quebec was acquired by the British and merged into a union through the Quebec Act of 1774. That's over 250 years ago now. Across the West, we are arguably at the end of our best before date. So what are we going to do about it? The New Canada Conversation is a project that looks at Canada's future specifically, although of course in a civilizational collapse, we won't be alone. I will also talk about the West as a whole, but for now it's fair to say, even obvious to say, that the wonderful Canada we used to know is terminal. She's gone, so grieve her loss and then let's move on. I'm Mark Hecht. I taught geography at Mount Royal University in Calgary for more than a decade. I've been involved in politics, business, and today I mostly call myself a writer. The New Canada Conversation is a project of mine that has come about because I haven't seen anyone other than perhaps Professor Zhang of predictive history talking about how nations and societies actually work, especially from the angle I'm going to give you. I'll do a number of video lectures about the hidden forces and the underlying patterns that shape nations and cultures and societies, and that help explain why we have the societies that we do, and where they're likely to go in the future. So they're likely to go in the future, and I'm going to present some universal patterns that can be applied to any place around the world, although I am mostly going to focus on Canada. So first things first, let's start by recognizing that all empires come to an end. We live in an empire, the American Empire or just the West, whatever you want to call it, it's coming to an end. Even though things are going to become quite rough, we can, if we would like, plan for a better future. And in order to do that, we need conversations that are informed, not inflamed. So I ask a few things of you. If you want to be involved, number one, ignore daily politics. And just ignore specific figures like Trump or Macron or Carney. But two, focus on reality, not your personal opinions. And three, engage in the conversation when you have something meaningful to say. In other words, never have an opinion on something you know nothing about. This is a basic rule of life that your parents should have taught you. And if they didn't, then learn it now. Having an opinion on something you know nothing about is a sign of bad character. I don't want people of bad character here. So again, number three, don't have an opinion on something you know nothing about. All right, having said that, if you do have something useful to say, or a meaningful question to ask, then please do. Now, having laid out the ground rules, or the rules of conduct, let's start by admitting that the West is coming to an end, And we can either fall into a state of lethargy, despair, and infighting, or we can create a future that could actually be pretty good. I often think of the difference between the Mughal Empire that ruled much of present-day India from the 16th to the 18th century. It collapsed for various reasons, and India today isn't any better than it was back then. It's dirty, corrupt, polluted, poor, and basically one of the worst countries on earth today. In contrast, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, when it collapsed at the end of World War I, actually became a better place. The countries of Austria and Hungary came out of the collapse, and today they are some of the best countries in the world. And the capital city of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Vienna, actually shrank in size, but it became a better city today than it was during the height of its time inside the old empire. It became better infrastructure, culture, cleaner streets, reinvigorated architecture, social services. In fact, Vienna today is consistently ranked as one of the top cities in the world to live. This is a very different outcome than any city in India once ruled by the Mughals. In the case of Vienna, it got better because the people and the leaders had foresight. They looked ahead to what they wanted and decided to create a better place even while they were in the midst of decline. And most empires in their capital cities crumble, but Vienna excelled. This is extraordinarily unusual. And I would like to suggest that we, Canada, become extraordinarily unusual. Let's become even better than we are today. So how do we go about doing that? Where do we start? Well, it involves understanding the foundations upon which we stand. Like a house, the most important component is the foundation. It's also the part that is the most unseen, the most unnoticed. Many great nations exist or existed on one single strong foundation. Canada actually sits on about half a dozen hastily assembled foundations. But that's okay. The best societies are built incrementally, not all at once. They have to start somewhere. And so far, we've been doing that, building incrementally better foundations. So I'm going to talk about our foundations in a way that I've never seen anyone else do. I'm going to reveal important patterns. And we'll see these patterns over and over again, and they'll help us understand the big picture. Like an invisible foundation, patterns, once you see them, you'll be saying, oh my God, of course. That makes so much sense. No wonder. So there's one pattern I would suggest is the most important, and it's almost like a universal law. It tells us who will be our natural friends and who will be our natural enemies. I'll start this with a simple question. Why are the countries of Canada and the United States oriented east-west and not north-south? Now, I've seen a lot of historians and others approach this question by suggesting that the two countries began historically in the east. Let's go with east this way. Started in the east and spread westward, and that has to do with the orientation of these two countries. But this is actually really a useless explanation, mostly because it's not actually true. The real influence is something else, and it shows up most prominently on the west side of the continent. I have to explain this by starting with a basic unit. The basic unit is the region. And okay, well, what do you mean by a region, Mark, you might ask? Regions are a basic geographic unit of measurement. Just like other systems have basic units of measurement, so does geography. And the imperial system, there's the imperial system for measuring distance, for example. It uses the inch as the basic unit of measurement. You've got inch, feet, yard, mile. Armies use the squad as their basic unit. You've got the squad, platoon, company, battalion. I'm using the region as the basic unit for measuring geography and politics. So we've got region, state, nation, world. So what is a region? Well, regions are geographic places that have a group of people who are relatively the same. The same language, the same customs, a common culture, religion, and so on. And they share a common culture. It doesn't have to be perfectly homogeneous. There can certainly be some mixing of other peoples, but for the most part, the people are identifiable. You got the Scottish, the Portuguese, the Catalan, the Haida, Japanese, the Blackfoot, Vietnamese, the Tunaka, the Berbers, Breton, and so on. Notice those groups listed didn't necessarily align with national borders. I mean, some do, some don't. Some do, some don't. Secondly, regions are defined as having a geographic space. So for example, we can say that Scotland is a region of the United Kingdom, and it's where the Scottish people call home. Scotland is a region, the American South is a region of the United States, Haida Gwaii is a region of British Columbia, and so on. None of these regions are completely homogeneous ethnically, and they are often not even perfectly defined by political or geographic boundaries. But everyone sort of recognizes them anyway, almost intuitively. They tend to have a distinct language and set of customs and way of seeing the world and a geographic territory that's their own. And then third, the region has an economy that influences who they are. Atlantic Canada, for example, is essentially an ocean-based fishing economy. Scotland has historically been rooted in the sea and the herding of sheep. And since food is the basis of life, each region usually has an identifiable connection to certain types of food, or food procurement. Or they have something else that's traded for food. So the region is the most important unit to look at how regions interact with one another. And that tells us what we really need to know about where Canada, and for that matter all of North America, is going. So this will tell us who will be friends and who will be enemies. So this is big. It's really big. And I'll explain with an example. So let's say we have a region over here. We'll just go. Okay, there's our region. There's region 1. It's mostly a flat place. It's in the mid-latitudes. Summers are short and hot. Winters are long and very cold. It's mostly dry. It's a very large area that takes up a big chunk of a continent. In fact, I'm going to say that's part of a continent. There's another region, and we're going to say this is sort of continent. Okay, this is ocean. Okay, so region 1, its natural vegetation is open grasslands. So we could be talking about the original prairies of North America or the pampas of South America, maybe Mongolia or even the Ukraine. Big, flat, open, and naturally a grassland environment. And it's a precarious place for agriculture. Sometimes agriculture works here and sometimes it really doesn't. So let's assume right now that our region is just a simple place. It doesn't have agriculture. It has the original grasslands. It has big herds of animals that roam across the vast area in search of grass to eat. And the people who live here, they follow the large herds and hunt them for food. Now, let's say we have another region to the west. See, we got another one here. Okay, so it's mountainous with north-south valleys. I'm going to put those in. We got mountains, lots of mountains. We got mountains over here. We got lots of mountains. Maybe we got some more here right in the middle. You know, mostly north-south mountain ranges. They got the valley bottoms. It's really, really dry and hot in the summer. There's sagebrush, cactus, rattlesnakes, but also some nice lakes in the valley bottoms. And as one ascends the mountains, the vegetation is increasingly lush. It's moist, it's thick. There are widely spaced ponderosa pine trees and bunch grasses at low elevation. You get to larch at mid-elevation and dense lodgepole pine forests near the top of the mountains. So the very top, it's too cold for forests. It's just open alpine. So this mountain landscape overall is very biologically and ecologically diverse. Winters in the valley bottom are quite mild. Food options are many. The people have access to a huge variety of wild foods. They got deer, elk, moose, bear, mountain goats, wild sheep, half a dozen wild chicken species, grouse, and fruits, berries, root vegetables are all naturally abundant. And the soils in the valley bottom are fertile. The people can grow food in the valley bottoms, but not so much anywhere else, as the rest is too steep, too rocky, or too cold higher up. So it has a lot of it has a lot in terms of choice and variety. And west of the mountains is another region, region 3. So let's just put that in here. Well, it's kind of here. It's up against the coast there. So this one has a narrow coastline backed by steep mountains. So we'll just add some more mountains here. More mountains. Okay, and this is a coastline. It's kind of the ocean there. Okay. So the people are oriented towards the sea, not the land. They get much of their food from the sea, and it's a very, very productive place. And because there is an abundance of food here, the region has a large and often dense population. And because there are so many people, they've divided themselves into smaller groups. And these smaller groups are very specific about what land belongs to them. You know, the individual territories they belong to are quite small, and each one of them tends to have their own language, their own customs. And so these are the basic regions across a very large area that covers a significant part of the continent. Not the whole continent, but a significant part of it for sure. So we've got the prairie people, the mountain people, and the coastal people. So I'm going to put in here, these are the prairie people. These are the mountain people. And these are the coastal people. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. Each region has something the others want. The prairie people, for example, they've got very lean meat from the animals they hunt. Now, since humans need both meat and fat for a proper diet, proper healthy diet, the prairie people actually want fats, which they don't have. Okay, so root, fruits, and vegetables are also important, of course, for a healthy diet, but they're in short supply as well here, actually. But the main problem for the prairie people is a lack of fat in their diet. Now, the coastal people have a lot of healthy fats or fatty food from things such as fish. They got the salmon, they've got the herring, but they lack other things like rope and clothing fiber. And that exists in abundance here among the mountain people. So the mountain people have a huge diversity of foods. They have many species of animals, huge diversity of plants, plant foods to choose from. They don't really need a lot of anything, but sometimes they do have shortages. So it helps for them to trade with both the coastal people and the prairie people. So they do. They all trade with one another. But there's a big problem here. The distance between the prairie people and the coastal people is huge. It's really far. It's over 1,000 kilometers. So they meet in the middle. And the people in the middle become the intermediaries, the go-betweens, the trade negotiators. They become very good at trading, bartering, negotiating, settling diplomatic disputes, and they even provide insurance policies for everyone. I'll explain in a second. But if you haven't caught on yet, I'm talking about the place where I grew up, which happens to be the southern interior of British Columbia. I grew up in here, the Okanagan Valley. Just so you know, I've also lived on the prairies. I went to school on the west coast of BC and now live on the coast full time. I've lived in all three regions, and this whole scenario that I'm talking about is really a story of how things worked among Indigenous peoples prior to European arrival. But as we'll see, it still works much the same way today. And so this is really important for telling us a lot about where we're going in the future. Okay, so let's get back to insurance. Let's do insurance. I had said something about insurance. And you might be saying, what the heck are you talking about, Mark? How do Indigenous people who didn't have a written language prior to European arrival create insurance policies, and why and for what? And so, what on earth are you talking about, Mark? Well, let me explain by starting with a problem that everyone understands. Now, every place has good times and bad times. Every farmer knows this well. Some years have great crops. Some crops every year is terrible. Not every year, every few years is terrible. Ranchers know this too. They can have good years when the rain comes, the grasses grow really well, and their cattle get fat and have babies, and the herd grows. It grows larger. Beekeepers, same thing. If there's lots of pollen one year and the plants are flowering, there will be lots of honey and lots of profit. So some years are good years and some years are bad years. And actually, it's a universal thing. You know this. Everyone knows this. Some years are good years and some years are bad years. For some, last year was a really bad year. And for others, it was just average. The trick in life is to find a way to soften the bad times by saving during the good times. In our real world scenario here, prior to European arrival, each of the three regions had bad years and good years, just like everyone else. But there was a really important thing here. The bad years in each of these regions happened at different times. This was really important. It was good that it happened this way, as if one region was having a really good year. Let's say the coastal region, they're having a really good year. They've got a great salmon run and they had a huge surplus of fish. But the prairie people, they're having a really bad year because, for whatever reason, because there was a local drought or something like that. And the people in the middle, well, they just had a normal year. So if one of the three regions had a bad year, in this example, the prairie region, so if one of the three regions, bad region, in this example, the prairie region, what do? What are these guys going to do? Do they say, oh, well, I guess there won't be enough food this year, so we'll just lay down on the grass or lay down on the ground and die? Of course not. Of course not. Everyone knew this is going to happen at some point. So they would have planned ahead to a certain degree. But because they're nomadic, they're out there on the grasslands chasing the buffalo. Because they're nomadic, planning ahead did not mean storing lots of food. They weren't filling up granaries with extra grain or anything like that. They couldn't really do that. So they had to have a different strategy other than simply storing food for the future. So they did something else instead. They bought an insurance policy of sorts. And I need to be clear about this. We're talking about pre-European North America. So the obvious question is, how do pre-literate people, without written records, without insurance agencies, buy insurance? Well, it's pretty cool. And the story I'm about to tell you was told to me by a man named Marlowe Sam from the Penticton Indian Band about 20 years ago. So we were talking about water rights and then he veered off into this topic. So I credit him with telling me what I'm going to share with you today. Insurance. Okay. So the prairie people have a really big problem. Starvation looks imminent. They've had a very bad year. So what do? Well, they send some of their people in the fall just before winter comes on, to trade with the mountain people. Because the problem is the prairie people have almost nothing to trade. As I said, it's a really bad year. So maybe they have a couple grungy bison skins and that's about it. But they go to the mountain people anyway, and they have to travel on foot or later on by horseback quite a long way, about 500 kilometers, roughly. So when they arrive at the trading location where the mountain people are known to be, the mountain people welcome them in, and they're actually really good at hosting visitors, by the way. The mountain people are great at this. They're great hosts. They make sure the prairie people are well fed and taken care of. And the mountain people notice right away that the prairie people, they haven't brought much to trade with them. You know, it's pretty clear the prairie people are having a really, really tough year. So the chief of the mountain people says, hey, let's play some games. Let's gamble. And the prairie people agree, yeah, that's a great idea. So everyone sits down and they all start gambling. And the gambling goes on for many days. And during the gambling, the chief of the mountain people watches really closely. And if he sees one of his own players winning against a prairie opponent, he goes over and says, hey, it's time to lose. So his own guy loses on purpose. Now this happens over and over again. So at the end of the many days of playing various gambling games, the mountain people, or the mountain players, have all lost more games than they won. And they've done it on purpose. So the prairie people are able to accumulate way more goods and food than they could have gained through a simple back and forth trading. So the prairie people go home with a massive surplus of goods. And when they get back, they get to boast about how successful they are at gambling and winning. And of course, they share their goods and food with everyone in the community, and everyone gets enough to survive the winter. Just in the nick of time when it looked like the whole community would starve and many would die. Now, everyone knows in the back of their minds that the mountain people lost the gambling games on purpose. And they all know the mountain people are owed a debt of gratitude. Actually, it's more than just gratitude or some big thank you card. What the mountain people have done is give the prairie people a loan. And it's expected this loan will be repaid at some point in the future. You know, that could be many, many years later. It will happen when the mountain people have a bad year. And they're bound to do that at some point. So it's understood among everyone that the prairie people will repay their loan at that time by losing on purpose in the gambling games. It's kind of a brilliant strategy when you think about it. It's a massive insurance policy for everyone involved. And of course, the same thing happens between when the mountain people and the coastal people come together as well. So in a sense, this fake gambling ritual, let's call it the Gamblers Club, is a massive insurance policy that the people in all three regions depend upon together. So the trading relationship with its built-in insurance policy, this loan system, helps spread the risk of bad times across a much larger area than if everyone was doing their own thing. So it softens bad years across all regions. They all benefit from direct trade in good years, and they benefit from loans in bad years. Now, academically, this is known as an energy leveling strategy. An energy leveling strategy. Okay, just so you know, one of the things that can also be done so that everyone understands that they're all in this together is that they'll sometimes find ways of cementing these relationships even further. Maybe the chief of each region sends a daughter to marry another chief's son in a different region. That's one way to solidify economic ties. You do it through these kinds of things. So there's other ways, of course, but that's a common one. Now, one of the big questions that we should ask here is, do these people have to be culturally the same? And, you know, do they have to speak the same language, have the same religion, same values? And is that even important? And the answer to that is no, not at all. Not at all. In fact, in this example, the prairie people were, and still are, warriors. In fact, I'm going to write that down. They are a warrior culture. These are the warriors. So these are the Blackfoot, the Sioux, and so on. They're tough, they're aggressive fighters with a warrior culture. So yeah, tough, aggressive fighters with a warrior culture. They are, with a warrior culture, aggressive fighters with a warrior culture. The mountain people, by contrast, in this case I am referring to the Okanagan, who call themselves the Syilx. They are negotiators and diplomats. So let's label them here as the diplomats. These are the diplomats. So even their current website, until just recently, used to say they were people born into negotiation and diplomacy. I don't know why they changed it recently, but they have. Anyway, it doesn't change anything. These people are the diplomats in this part of the continent. And unlike the prairie people, they really suck at fighting. I mean, they really suck at fighting. And that's not just me saying that. As one of the elders from the Penticton Indian band, Richard Armstrong, once said to me, "We're not like the prairie Indians. They shoot first, ask questions later." Okay, but what about the coastal people? For now, I will call them the merchants. I have a different name for them, which I will tell you about later. But for now, let's call them the merchants. These are the merchants. So we've got the merchants, diplomats, and warriors. They are very much interested in trade, not so much amongst themselves, ironically, but they are very much interested in trade with the mountain people, the prairie people, and from anyone on the other side of the ocean, way over here. I'll explain this a little bit more later, but for now, I want to point out that the coastal people are, interestingly, in some ways, kind of similar to the prairie people, in that they can be quite violent. They have a culture of fighting, but it's a different type of fighting than the prairie warriors. The reason has to do, again, with geography. You see, as I mentioned before, the coastal people are incredibly diverse. Their natural environment is highly productive. There's a high density of food available in the form of salmon and other seafood. They have large populations. that are quite dense, all up and down the coast. Because there's so many of them, they divided themselves up into very small territories with rigid boundaries. And over time, all these small but densely populated microregions developed a huge diversity of languages and cultures. And in order to defend the little territories from one another, they get violent a lot with one another. I'll explain why in more detail later, but let's just say that these people do a lot of fighting among themselves and among one another on water, boats, canoes, ships, whatever. Oh, and because their main source of food is fish, and fish requires a lot of energy to process, it's way better to get slave labor to do that task. Way better. So, yeah, as I say, slave labor to do this task. So these coastal people tend to steal women and children from their neighbors and make them into slaves. Overall, what's interesting, it's not the slavery part, it's that these three regions, the coast, the mountain, and the prairie, they're all friends. These are all friends because they depend on each other for trade. And trade is the giant continental insurance policy. And this is all related to the physical geography. It's the geography that has facilitated the friendship, or facilitated their friendships. So because the geography is so different between these three regions, each region has good times and bad times at different times, as I said. That allows each region to have different things to trade, and it means they can ask for help from neighbors when things go badly, precisely because two regions will not have bad years at the same time. So they each help each other out. They're different, they're not the same. They live in different landscapes, have different things to offer at different times. There's an academic way of saying this. This is topographically heterogeneous environments subject to non-synchronous productivity fluctuations promote trade and alliances. Now, do you think that when Europeans arrived that this pattern suddenly changed? Of course not. Of course not. The general pattern has surprisingly remained pretty much the same right up to the present moment, as I'll show. In other words, due to the geography, trade has naturally been east-west. East-west, not north-south. Trade this way. Not so much. I know some of you are saying, oh, but oil, but we'll get to the oil later, but not right now. The coastal people, for example, are not going to trade fish for more fish down here. So the north coast with fish from the south coast, why would you do that? The mountain people are not going to trade rope for rope, and the prairie people are not going to trade bison skins for more bison skins down here. So trade naturally happens east-west. Or it has happened east-west. It still happens east-west. We'll come back up. So not north-south. Geography explains the orientation of the North American continent, and it's predominantly east-west. I should add, because the west side of the continent is much more geographically diverse and more topographically extreme than the east side of the continent, the flow of trade east-west is actually much more amplified on this side. Okay, just so you know, this pattern was recognized from an anthropology researcher named Chris White at UCLA in California, who was really interested in intertribal warfare among tribes in what is the southwestern United States today. He wrote a number of papers on this subject, and he wanted to know, prior to European arrival, which tribes were friends and which were enemies. So I credit him for being the one to actually discover the basic pattern. And what he found was that friendships between tribes historically existed east-west, not north-south. And the reason, as mentioned before, is that, so east-west, enemies were north-south. So the reason, as mentioned before, is that good times and bad times happen together at different times in topographically heterogeneous environments. Sorry, even I'm getting confused. When one region is doing badly, another is doing well. They each have something the other wants in trade. So things will inevitably go badly for each region during different times, during different years. So they help each other out, and they can weather the rough times together. So they become friends. But what about the enemies? Well, this has to do with synchronous productivity fluctuations, which is just a fancy way of saying that neighboring regions have bad times at the same time. And this is definitely not a good thing. For example, let's say we have a region that's mostly flat. We'll start with, let's say we've got, this is kind of a continent. We've got ocean down here. This is all ocean, ocean, ocean. Up here's ocean. Okay, so that's all ocean. This is land. And I've lost my red pen. Hang on. Okay, so there's our region. There's slow-moving rivers. The people grow rice. It's the dominant economic activity here, rice growing. Maybe there's a big lake in the middle. Let's put a big lake in the middle. There's a nice big lake in the middle. Well, I guess it's not that big, but there's a lake in the middle. And it drains out a few ways to the ocean. I'll put that in a second. But let's say there's a region next to it to the west. So there's another region here. And it also has slow-moving rivers. Maybe you got some, like, does it come out this way? Another one over here. It's got a little delta at the end there. Goes out into the ocean, a little delta. The people, they're also rice growers. And there's a small ridge of mountains. It's barely mountains. I mean, it's pretty tiny, but between those two. And that acts like a natural barrier to a certain degree, but they're otherwise both engaged in similar economic activity in similar landscapes. And let's say there's a third region to the east. I'll put it right here. And this region is also, it's flat with slow-moving rivers. In fact, this kind of goes out like this. One spreads in like so. It's got a big delta at the end there of the river. And these people are also rice growers. The only difference between these three groups is that they speak different languages. Now, do you think that these people would be friends? Of course not. Of course not. Their basic economies are similar. So they have nothing to trade with one another. They're not going to trade rice for rice. So they don't really need anything from one another. They're not dependent upon one another. And that's the problem. They have the same things, and they also suffer hard times at the same time. So these people are definitely not going to, or these people are definitely going to be enemies. They're not going to be friends. And now, some might say, wait, why can't they just live peacefully beside one another and leave each other alone? Especially if they don't even trade with one another. And it's a reasonable question. But you see, there's a big problem here. This problem always shows up sooner or later. And it usually happens because of the weather. The weather comes from the south and it comes from the north. And that affects each of the regions the same way at the same time. And sometimes there's not enough rain to grow enough food and keep everyone fed. Sometimes there's too much rain and the rice crops are flooded. Starvation becomes a problem either way. Too much rain or too little rain, same problem. And since this is the same area, a bad weather event means that things go badly for all three regions at the same time. They all suffer food shortages simultaneously. So what do? Do they say, oh well, I guess there won't be enough food this year, so we might as well just lay down on the ground and die? Of course not. No, each region knows that they have it bad, and they know their neighbor has it bad. Everyone is short of food. No one has enough food for this really bad time. But you know what they say? They say, hey, those people over there, they might not have very much food, just like we don't have very much food, but they will have at least something. So let's go steal whatever they have so we don't starve. Someone's got to eat. Better us than them. Desperate times call for desperate measures. So they become raiders, thieves, plunderers. Okay, of course, the people in all three regions are thinking the same thing. So they all become raiders, thieves, and plunderers. And they steal from their regional neighbors. Everyone does it. Maybe one region sends an organized army to plunder the neighboring region, or maybe it's just marauding bandits that do it, but nonetheless, they all do it. And in case you haven't figured out where it is I'm talking about, this is Southeast Asia. Specifically, this is Thailand. This is Cambodia. Let's just put Cambo. And this is South Vietnam. Okay, so draw that out, got it. I'm not sure if you can see that, hope you can see that. Okay, for all you peaceful, naive Buddhists, the sad reality is that this region fights with one another constantly. Always has. So these groups have fought throughout history, and through history, will not just raid their neighbor, but actually try to take over the whole area. So sometimes one will try and take over the whole area and make it one unified empire. This is usually short-lived, maybe 250 years, followed by a collapse. And the old borders go back to roughly the same three original regions, what we refer to today, roughly, as Thailand, Cambodia, and southern Vietnam. So these Southeast Asian nations will often proclaim publicly that they're friends. The ruling families are even closely related. But the reality is, they all live in an area of the world that has a natural environment with a fairly homogeneous landscape that virtually compels them to fight each other when their food production goes down at the same time, which inevitably it does. It's actually worse than this, truth be told, because sometimes they realize they can't steal from their neighbors during bad times for whatever reason. Maybe one knows they're no match for, say, a bigger neighbor, like Cambodia against Thailand, for example. So they turn inward and fight amongst themselves, often in brutal civil wars. Now, Southeast Asia is not uncommon. This is a pattern found in many places around the world. The Yucatan Peninsula, the Ukraine, North Africa, and so on. The general rule is that these areas where regional neighbors have homogeneous landscapes and synchronous productivity fluctuations across homogeneous landscapes, they'll be enemies. They'll raid one another when things get really bad. Sometimes they do it even when things are really good. They will attack neighbors just for the hell of it. And why not? This helps build their reputation as being ferocious, nasty fighters that you don't want to mess with. And it gives the raiders, thieves, and plunderers a reputation of being unpredictable. Don't mess with them, and if you think about it, that's a really good reputation to have if you want your neighbors to fear you. And why wouldn't you? If you have neighbors with a bad habit of coming over and trying to steal from you, it's good to let them know it won't be easy. So these regions, these people, are natural enemies who live in homogeneous landscapes with multiple regions that suffer synchronous productivity fluctuations. As I said, we see the same pattern around the world, including parts of Canada. Those coastal people I mentioned earlier were prone to this pattern of fighting one another precisely because they live in coastal environments that is homogeneous north-south. So, let's get rid of this. We're leaving Southeast Asia behind. Nice place, but time to go. Okay, so the coastal area has homogeneous north-south trade, right? Like we said, there's the coastal region. It's homogeneous north-south. We've got the ocean. We've got mountains at the back. It's really productive and supports, this whole area is really productive and supports lots of people, dense populations, big coastal population. Each group along the coast has well-defined territories, but when things go badly, maybe the salmon run is really poor, then everyone up and down the coast suffers at the same time. So before Europeans arrived, each group would plunder from their neighbors. The Haida raided the Haisla, the Kwakwaka'wakw raided the Cowichan raided the Kwantlen. Kwantlen fought the Squamish, and the Squamish raided the Tsawwassen, and so on. And yet what's interesting is that as a collective group, the coastal people were all friends with the inland mountain people. The Okanagan and the Shuswap, for example. So let's put the mountain back in here. We got the mountain again. Mountain, they're in here. The prairie people are over here. Okay, so out on the prairies, it was the same situation. Prior to European settlement, the Blackfoot over here, they had a semi-nomadic lifestyle. Yeah, so out on the prairies, it was the same situation. European settlement, Blackfoot, semi-nomadic lifestyle, living in the same climatic conditions and the same grassland environments as like the Sioux to the south of them. So yeah, there's the Sioux, there was the Shoshone, all south of them. So they fought one another and stole from one another. The men were seen as valiant and brave if they could take things from their enemies. Yet those very same people, the Blackfoot, for example, over here, did not fight with the mountain people or steal from them. And why not? Well, because the Blackfoot traded with the mountain people, so they were friends. In other words, the prairie people were friends with the mountain people, the prairie people were enemies with other prairie people. Same pattern of trade is true elsewhere, with mountain people as well. The mountain people were friends with the coast people to the west, and the prairie people to the east. But they were enemies with their similar mountain neighbors to the north and to the south. Because the north-south orientation of the mountains on the western side of the continent, let's put these mountains back in. We've got the Rocky Mountains. Okay, we got Rocky Mountains there. Produces similar resources. So trade did not happen north-south. It went east-west. In fact, you know, I remember when I was younger, it was not uncommon to hear stories about how some Okanagan native guy that went up to some bar, you know, from here went up to some bar in Kamloops, up in Shuswap territory. And yeah, this was in Kamloops, Shuswap territory, gotten into a fist fight with some Shuswap native guy, and they would say it was over a woman. Of course, but really, there was a long-running animosity, as subtle as it was between the Okanagan and the Shuswap. You got the Okanagan down here, Shuswap up here. and the Shuswap. This stems from this pattern. So they both live in virtually the same type of landscape. They had little to trade with one another because the landscape, the geographies, are the same. So they were competitors, not allies. So we have friendships here that exist due to non-synchronous productivity fluctuations across topographically heterogeneous environments. East-west means they're friends. Enemies, on the other hand, occur in the areas where neighboring regions share similar geographies and landscapes that undergo synchronous productivity fluctuations across homogeneous landscapes. This is the underlying reason why Canada and the United States are east-west oriented countries. It's partly history, but it's much more about history built on the back of geography. Beneficial trade east-west created political unions that are east-west. North-south didn't make much sense at the time. As I said, this pattern is ironically stronger and even more amplified on the western side of the continent than it is on the eastern side, which I'll get to later. But for now, we should note that when Canada and the United States came into being, this pattern made a lot of sense. It was a pattern very much at the root of political alignments. It made sense in terms of trade for both Canada and the United States to be oriented east-west, not north-south. In fact, this natural pattern in trade was so overwhelmingly important that Canada institutionalized the pattern and made it a major component of its identity through what we know as transfer payments. The idea was simple. Provinces would share in the good times and the bad times together. Not a new idea by any means. Transfer payments were introduced by the Canadian federal government as a way to spread the burdens of bad times across the country in order to soften the negative effects of unequal economic activity. Soften across the country in order to soften the negative effects of unequal economic activity that's going to happen across this very large expanse we call Canada. It was a great idea, and as I said, it was not by any means a new idea. It's a strategy that's at least 10,000 years old here. The nation state of Canada just formalized it. That's all. Transfer payments are just a modern version of the gambler's loan. Okay, but there's still a big problem here. A really big problem. The Gamblers Club only works so long as everyone is pulling their weight, giving their fair share of give and take. If one group feels like they're doing all the lifting and all the lending, and the other groups are doing all the taking, the gambler's loan will fail. It'll fall apart. Now, if you have a situation where you've got two people where those two people are giving good, there's a lot of give and take back and forth, great. If you have another situation where, say you've got a friend who is always coming to you for loans. You're a hard-working individual. You're out there busting your butt more than 40 hours a week. You make lots of money. Your friend is always coming to you and saying, hey, can I borrow some money? And they never pay you back. That's a problem. So, are you going to remain friends with this individual? Of course not. And in Canada's case, the relationship between BC and Alberta is actually a lot like the first relationship, or like the first scenario. These are the two most deeply interconnected economies in Canada because their economies are different. Alberta is a boom and bust economy. During boom times in Alberta, British Columbians often go to work in Alberta. During bad times in Alberta, people often go to BC. Alberta's economy is more extreme. BC's economy is more stable, but sort of less exciting, less lucrative. BC has an economy based on trees, fruit, wine, real estate, natural health products, services, gas, and more trees. Alberta's economy is wheat, cows, and oil. Together, this is very complementary. So the people in the two provinces benefit immensely from their differences. However, the relationship between Alberta and the East is more like that second situation. The East takes, but never seems to give back. This is not going to end well in the long run. The Alberta members in our Gamblers Club have been talking quite seriously about leaving the club for good. And it seems there's no benefit for them to stay. Now, the thing that never gets talked about is how long does one party support the other? Because at the end of the day, some people, they can seem like they're mooches, but in fact, they're just slow starters. Um, once they get going, they build really large, strong, sturdy economies and have the resources at that time to help out those who are having a bad year. In other words, Alberta's impatience and its plan to sever ties with the East may turn out to be a bad long-term move. I don't actually know. I'm just saying. It's something to consider. But in this particular moment in history, Alberta has been flush with money, and Alberta's he's getting tired of lending to the East without getting anything in return. Transfer payments can work and not work. Now, among all of this change, if one or more underlying factors change, let's think about this. Consider what happens when a new product or technology is introduced that upsets the old trade pattern. Maybe old friends become enemies and enemies become friends. So let's do a modern update, shall we? As I said, this natural trade pattern and friendship alliance can change in ways no one predicted. In the original scenario I gave you, 3 regions historically benefited from trade with one another. But now we have a new variable to consider. Let's say we have the 3 regions like we had before, but circumstances change in one of the regions. Let's say we still have the prairie region, the mountain region, and the coastal region. They developed strong and complex trading arrangements over a long period of time, thousands of years. Everyone did well with the way things were in the past. It was well balanced. But then one day, the prairie region discovers a product that's really lucrative. But the prairie people need to sell it to other regions to really cash in on it. This causes a huge problem. The mountain people and the coastal people, they don't have much desire for this new product. They use it, but they don't really need it that much. It's not a trade item they're clamoring over. In fact, they don't really like it. They don't really like it at all, to be honest. And they have other options they actually prefer. So they're not very good customers for the prairie people. The modern prairie people look all around, and their cultural cousins but trading enemies to the south, way down there, way down there, don't really need it either because they too have discovered the same product. And they already have access to customers out to the sea. But reluctantly, these southern cousins down here agree to buy some of the new product from the prairie people at a reduced price, of course, which they will mark up when selling it to their customers. And what can the prairie people do? They're kind of hooped. So, yeah, what do the prairie people do? They're kind of hooped. They have to sell it south, since they're the only ones willing to buy at first. But the prairie people keep looking around, and they know they could get way more money for their product if only they could sell directly to customers around the world. The prairie people really, really want a better price for their product. They want more money. And the prairie people have to find another customer, a customer that will pay big bucks, top dollar. And that customer, they realize, is in another region on the other side of the ocean, way over there. And that's not so bad. Transportation over water is really cheap, cheaper than trains or trucks or donkeys or horses or etc. So selling the product to these people on the other side of the ocean wouldn't be a bad option at all. In fact, it's the only option at this point as far as the prairie people are concerned. They just have to get their product to the ocean and onto ships. And the last thing for them is, or the best thing for them to do is send the product through a big long pipe across the lands of the mountain people and the coastal people to a port where the ships can take the product to their potentially high-paying customers. And at first the coastal people, And the mountain people let them build a pipe across their regions to the sea. And there's no complaints. Then one day, the product gets into the ocean, and it really harms the coastal people. And the pollution affects them for a long time. And the memory is seared into their consciousness forever. Years later, the prairie people want to build another pipe to get more of their product to customers on the other side of the ocean. Unfortunately, the mountain people and the coastal people wouldn't gain much from the second pipe or third pipe or any further pipe. In fact, they didn't really gain much from the first pipe either. And they know now that the pipe carries a product that is really dangerous. If the product got into the ocean again, it would devastate the coastal people and their ocean-based economy. It would destroy their entire way of life and make them very, very poor. It's not a risk they want to take. They tell the prairie people, no way, no more pipes. Well, the prairie people don't like being told no. They're actually a bit like petulant children when someone tells them no. Why are they petulant? I don't know, but they just kind of are. And the people in the middle, the mountain people, can see how the new product is causing tensions between the coastal people and the prairie people. And they want to find a good solution because that's what they do. They're negotiators, they're diplomats, and they want to find a good solution. As I say, that's what they do. So they're the diplomats, but there doesn't seem to be a good solution. Besides, the coastal people have adamantly said no to the prairie people and their pipe dreams. To make matters worse, the customers on the other side of the ocean that really want to buy this new product have begun to meddle in the politics of the coastal people in an attempt to sway their decisions. Now, these customers have even bought up some of the production facilities in the prairie region. And even worse, the prairie people don't seem to respect the coastal people. They're aggressive, they're petulant, self-centered, and they just won't take no for an answer. In fact, they get really aggressive and manipulative in their demands. This, of course, makes the coastal people really angry. The corruption, the pressure, and the meddling. It's all too much. And they're super mad, but quietly so, because that's the way they are as a people. That's their personality. They're quietly passive-aggressive, unlike the loud and vocal warrior people of the prairies. Meanwhile, the prairie people have become so absolutely infuriating to the coastal people that the relationship between the coast and the prairie really starts to break down. But the prairie people are kind of oblivious to all of this. And all they think about is money, money, money. They even start talking about taking matters into their own hands by co-opting the mountain people. And now the mountain people start to worry. They used to think of the prairie people as friends, but the prairie people have been getting so loud and aggressive and demanding lately that the mountain people begin to wonder if the prairie people would actually do such a thing as try and take them over. Would they invade? I mean, the mountain people were neutral diplomats in the past, but now they begin to align more closely with the coastal people, who they're actually more culturally similar to anyway. And things are really complicated internally too in this region, because there are many prairie people who live among the mountain people. And those migrants are often aligned with the thinking and the position of the prairie region. And well, what happens when a group of people immigrate into an area and cause problems? Yeah, the locals start thinking, how do we get rid of these people? they're causing problems. They're causing trouble. In this particular case, the mountain people are going to turn to the coastal people and say something like, hey, you guys know how to fight. Teach us how to fight. And that's where we are today. The coastal people against the prairie people, with the mountain people caught in the middle. Now, if things go peacefully, the potential customers on the other side of the world, they see the problems are immense and they back off in their meddling. And the prairie people look for other options to get their product out that doesn't involve the coastal and the mountain people. And the prairie people calm down and get back to having mutual trade between the three regions. Slowly, these three regions become actual friends again. And if it goes any other way, then it's probably going to get incredibly ugly. It will probably get violent, and then all bets are off as to what the final outcome would look like. Okay, so that's it for today. In the next lecture, I will talk about why some regions have cultures based on competition, Alberta, why other regions have cultures based on cooperation, the mountain region of British Columbia, and why some regions have cultures based on hierarchy, Ontario and Quebec, and how these cultures, with these internal differences, kind of in the software of the mind, so to speak, can cause a lot of problems, but also offer some really interesting solutions. And on that note, we're done.